Okay.
Good morning.
Well, good morning, everyone. Oh, it's a great day. A little windy, though. The wind's kind of brutal.
Get rid of that.
I hear a joyful noise. They're working on it. Okay. So, I've got some announcements. First is don't forget that June 7th, that's a Friday, is going to be the church rummage sale fundraiser for Honduras. Originally, we were having that fundraiser as part of the trip that's going, and now it doesn't look like the trip is going. However, we can still send our funds on ahead down there to Honduras, which is what we'll do. And no, what we ought to do is we ought to have, this is just a mental note, it's not for you, it's for me. We ought to have like some videos of our missionaries on our YouTube, our YouTube page, so people can see and kind of identify if they need refreshed on what's going on, because the Brenners down there in Honduras are doing a great thing with young men, and it's kind of exciting. They do have like an Instagram page, so you can track it there, but it'd be nice to have like a video. Maybe we can do quarterly updates or something. Sorry, like I said, mental notes here. They aren't so mental, they're just kind of out there. Okay, there are more announcements. And because we have such an amazing IT staff here, no, we do. They do an amazing job. And one of the things we've got right now is we have a web page, and we've been working on that quite a bit. And one of the things on the web page here, I'm trying to get it to come up. Well, it does come up, but it's on the wrong page. Just bear with me. This is how we make the sausage, as they say. Announcements. So this week there's a big change, and so really the web page isn't that hard to get to. And when you get there, it's got a list of upcoming events. And the first big change, and this is the big change, the Ladies Walk and Talk is on Monday. Now, it wasn't on Monday, but it's on Monday at 10:30 a.m. up at the Thompson track. Okay. If you don't know what goes on there, I'm going to read it again. It's the Ladies Walk and Talk at Thompson track. So
There you go.
you're going to go around the track and walk and talk.
Oh, there we go. There.
Look behind you.
Oh, there's the webpage. Oh, you missed the breakfast.
That was good.
Oh, no, we did.
All right, keep going down. Oh, this is exciting. Look at that. See, there's the Ladies Walk and Talk. We have prayer on Wednesday at 5:30. The Athey Creek Lodge party is at 7. Women's Bible study on the 23rd at 6. And then we'll meet here again next week. So, I see a hand.
There is no women's Bible study this week.
Oh,
They'll resume the week after.
no women's Bible study this week. Okay?
Sorry about that.
This is, once again, you're seeing how the sausage is made. Okay, anything else?
No.
I sure feel like there's something. But, all right. Let me just turn it over to the Lord. Well, before we get started, let's pray. Father, we are so grateful for the opportunity of being here today to fellowship, to encourage one another, to worship you, and to study your word. We just ask your blessing on this time as we open your Bible. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so as you may remember, we are there was an announcement.
Jesus is risen.
Thank you. I feel better. So, we've been going through the book of Ruth. And if you, let's check the IT staff back there. Oh, he's doing something else.
No, it's just
So the website, you can see the teachings, but also on YouTube, right? So we have a YouTube page that's pretty easy to get to. And anyway, on the YouTube, you can see the first 2 teachings that we've done so far in the book of Ruth. And the first one was an introduction, and then we did the first 2 chapters, and today we'll do the second 2 chapters, and then next week, Ken Post is going to do kind of a summary and point out how the book of Ruth and this person, this character, this individual had an impact on all of humanity. And I'm hopefully not overselling. Well, I know I'm not because I know the story. But so today we're going to jump into Ruth chapter 3. And just a reminder of where we've been. Ruth is a Moabite. She was a Moabitess, and what had happened was she lived in Moab, and this family moved from Bethlehem, which was the breadbasket of the area. Bethlehem means house of bread, and she lived there. But this family, they had moved from Bethlehem to Moab because there was a famine, right? And we talked a little bit about the fact that is moving away for a while bad? Not necessarily, but it is bad when you start kind of compromising. And that's kind of what we felt like was happening with Naomi's family. They came over, compromised a little bit. The boys, her sons, ended up marrying Moabite women. And we talked about how in this book everybody's name has meaning. And so the dad that took the family over, his name was Elimelech, which means God is king. And Naomi, her name means sweet or pleasant. And then Malon, which means sickness, and Chilion means wasting. So those are the 2 boys. And they come over, and what happens is the boys marry. One of them marries Ruth, and her name means friend or friendship. And the other is Orpah, and her name means neck or fawn. And some people like to point out it may mean neck because she was kind of stiff-necked, because after the boys died, this family is in Moab, the husband dies, the 2 boys die, and now Ruth is left with her 2 daughters-in-law. And Naomi says, I'm gonna go back to my country. And she tells the daughters-in-law, hey, why don't you guys stay here? And Orpah, she says, hey, you know what? You're right. I'm just going to stay here. I'm going to start a media company and have a show on national. Oh, that's Oprah, not Orpah. But anyway, she does stay. Right? She stays. But Ruth goes. And Ruth makes that famous declaration that where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God, and if anything but death separates us, bring a curse upon me. So she does, and Ruth goes back. And we talked about how in this time and in this culture, being a childless widow was pretty rough, right? Because there weren't a lot of government programs. However, there was one. And that one program was called gleaning. And we looked at that in a little bit of detail. And what gleaning was when they went out to harvest the land. If they're out harvesting and they drop some grain on the ground, they couldn't pick it up. And that was left for the widows and the poor. They could go out and pick that up. And they couldn't, go to the corners. And there were certain things that they had to do. But they could only go through the field once, and they had to leave some for the poor. And so Ruth, she's like, hey, she says to her mother-in-law, she says, hey, I'm going to go out and start gleaning. And well, she gleans, and she goes to this field, just so, air quote, happens, that she comes to this field of a guy named Boaz. And Boaz, he notices her and says, hey, stick in my field, right? Stay with my gleaners from the barley harvest to the wheat harvest, right? That whole time, I want you to stay here with my gleaners. And then he goes on to tell his harvesters, hey, you know what? You can leave a little bit for her. And if she gets too close, don't stop her. And the neat thing about gleaning is that it's a way to help the poor and needy. And it still gives them some dignity, right? Because they're out working. And also, it's not just simply a handout. Okay? So we also saw that Ruth had lunch with them. Boaz said, "Oh, you can have lunch." And she even took some of her leftover lunch home to her mother-in-law. And her mother-in-law saw that she came back with a pretty good gleaning. And we saw that it was like about 5 gallons, right? Which is pretty good for just going up and picking up stuff that falls on the ground. So, here we go. Chapter 3. It says, then Naomi, so it's been a while. She's been doing this. It says, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor." So, a little time's gone on, and now he's going to be at the threshing floor winnowing barley. And winnowing is, we have machines that do all that stuff now. But back in the day, they didn't have machines. And what they would do is they'd find a spot, basically in a saddle of a hill where the winds would come up. Okay? And so they'd pick up the barley and they'd throw it up, and the chaff is lighter, it blows over here, and the barley falls here, and so that's how they separate the grain from the chaff. And so they go up there and they do it at night, because that's when the winds start in this area. And here they just blows all the time. Anyway, so we're going to see something, and if you've been here a while, you've heard me say this before, and this is going to be a good example of it, right? The scriptures were written for us, but they weren't written to us. Okay? And what does that mean? It sounds kind of similar. Well, it just means that, yeah, absolutely, the Bible is 100% for us, right? But it was written, and we looked at this a long time ago, to a culture that we're not familiar with, right? So that's the part that wasn't really written to us. So there may be some things that we have to dig a little bit to understand. Otherwise, the story may sound strange. It does sound strange if you don't know some of the backstory, some of the culture. So what happens is she says, Naomi says, "Hey, Boaz is a relative." Now some of you know the punchline here, and that is, in this culture, there was a thing called a kinsman redeemer. Okay, the Hebrew there is goel. And there's 2 things that a kinsman redeemer could redeem. Okay, one of them is in Numbers, and Leviticus. We'll get it. Leviticus is the redeemer of the land. So the way it worked in Israel, it is each tribe got an allotment of land. Okay, but you could never sell the land in perpetuity, right? So really, and what the Bible says is that God said, "I own the land." Okay, so basically you're leasing the land from God. And so what happens, let's say, life gets rough and I need to sell my land, and I want to sell it to Dustin, right? Well, the way it works is, and perhaps you've heard of the year of Jubilee, right? So in the year of Jubilee, all land would revert back to the original owner or the owner's family. Okay, so if we're in year 25, before the year of Jubilee, and Dustin wants to buy my land, basically what he's buying is a 25-year lease, because at the end of the 25 years, it's going to revert back to me or my kids, right? Well, what happens is if Dustin buys it, and then my kids work hard and they get earn their money, they can buy it back from Dustin, right? He has to sell it back, and it's based on that whole lease time. So there's this property aspect that can be redeemed, okay? Because it reverts back to the family. The property's got to stay in the family. And then the other one, which once again, if you don't know this, it's kind of strange. And that is in Deuteronomy 25. It's the whole story of the Levirate marriage. Okay? And we talked about that because we talked about Judah and his daughter-in-law, right? And how he was supposed to provide a son, and he held back on the last one, and so we did that story. We don't want to do it again, but you can hear it in the introduction YouTube video. Anyway, in this law, what happens is if a guy marries a woman and he dies before she has a male offspring, then it's the duty of his brother to marry her and to father a child in the name of the guy that passed away. Right? And so today, that would be like on Jerry Springer or something, right? Because to us that sounds a little bit off, but it was very critical back then, right? To carry on this family legacy, and really it's not as strange as it first sounds, right? Because think of how many people today want to have children, and the whole money that they'll spend on in vitro fertilization and fertility and all that, right? I mean, we have a desire to, carry on our lineage, okay? So it was huge then, very, very, very big. And so what happens is here's two things that are going on, and that is that there's a land issue that can be redeemed, and there's also, we have a widow who doesn't have any descendants, okay? But we know there's no more brothers, because that was kind of a big thing that Naomi pointed out. I got no more boys. Why are you even coming back with me? But she does. So now all of a sudden, Naomi points out, hey, this guy's a relative, and well, we'll see how close of a relative he is. Okay, so she says, verse 3 says, wash therefore and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. So, cultural things going on here, but some practical things for us, okay? The first thing, cultural, it says that she needs to wash and anoint herself. Well, just an FYI, in this culture, they didn't take a bath every day, right? Probably wasn't a weekly event either.
No.
Probably not a monthly event, right? It was probably a special occasion before you took a bath, okay? Now remember, they've been harvesting. We know that she's been out there working, doing manual labor, right? And so now Naomi's trying to play matchmaker, and she's like, you know what you need to do? You need to take a bath, right? You need to clean up and anoint yourself. Put some perfume on because you kind of got the stink going on. Now, I'm reading a little bit into it, just a little bit, but you follow what I'm saying, right? That's practical. I mean, that's practical. And there's a cultural difference. But check this out. He says, but do not make yourself known until the man has finished eating and drinking. Right? And there may be some wisdom there too. Right? If the guy's eating and drinking, just let him finish up. If you want to, go on a trip, right? You're going to feed him dinner, let him get happy in his happy place. Then you're going to ask him, hey, honey, let's go on a trip, right? Or whatever it is. So there's a little bit of takeaway here. So it says, but when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say I will do. All right. So a little bit of weirdness going on here, right? So she goes to where they are, and when they're doing this winnowing of the grain, they will stay there overnight, right? A couple of things. It's the end of the harvest. They're doing the winnowing, but you want to stick by it because you don't want somebody to come and steal your grain. Okay, so and they've got different piles around, and people will be sleeping by different piles. So she says, go there and then uncover his feet, and then lay down. Kind of interesting. I think part of the uncovering the feet is it's a nice way to wake him up. That's not going to be shocking, but it will be a little shocking. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the grain heap. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." So she does the lay down and covers his feet. In the middle of the night, his feet get cold. He wakes up. He's like, "Oh, there's a lady here." He's like, "Who are you?" And she says, "I'm Ruth." And now Ruth does something. She says, "Hey, you know what?" She says, "Spread your wings." That word can also mean corners of your garment, right? So it's a covering over your servant, for you are a redeemer. So now Ruth is saying, "Hey, you know what?" And I think there's a reason why it's waited this long to happen, because they know, she's known throughout the community that she's a widow, right? And so now all of a sudden she's making the first move here on this redeemer bit. Okay, so she's a widow. She knows that she's got a relative that's close. It's not a brother, probably not an uncle. My understanding, the way the order of eligible Leverites, right? Those that can step up and be the Goel, the redeemer. So it's going to be a brother first, right? If it's not a brother, then it goes to uncle. And if it's not an uncle, it goes to cousin. And then I'm guessing it goes down to cousin, right? Second cousin, whatever. So we know that it's not a brother because Naomi said she has no more sons. But he's a relative. And she has said, "You know what? I want you to step up to the plate and take this role as redeemer." Right? Because there's property involved and there's also no children. So she's come here and she's done this. And she says, "Spread your wings, or you're covering over me." And like I said, there's good reason to believe it. It is referring to, it's symbolic either way, whether wings, right? Because he's not a big bird. But also the hem of your garment. And we know biblically, right, that the hem of the garment is significant. Right? Remember the woman with an issue of blood, she just wanted to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. Or when David was running from Saul, and he was held up in the cave, and he cut off the hem of the garment of Saul and held it up, right? So there's significance in this hem. And so she says, "Cover me with your hem." And he says, verse 10, he says, "And he said, May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor nor rich." So we have a good idea here that Boaz is kind of long in years. He's older than her. And he's like, "You know what? You've stepped up and you said you want me to be your redeemer." And he's touched, right? He's like, "You didn't go after the young guys. You did, whether they were poor or rich, you went after this old guy." And he says, "And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman." So it's been around town that she is a worthy woman. "And now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning I will redeem you. Oh, if he will redeem you, good. Let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning." So he says, "Okay, here's the deal. I'm all in on this deal. However, right, it's a legal kind of situation, and there's a redeemer that's closer than I am." And a lot of scholars will, point out that, clearly Boaz has, been thinking this through. because he's done the research and knows there's a closer redeemer. It may be that, well, I think there's probably a pretty good indication in the story that Boaz was interested in Ruth. Okay, but I don't think you have to do a lot of research to know who's a closer relative, right? I mean, for example, Gary Denny. Anybody ever heard of Gary Denny's floor covering? Oh, look at that, yeah. Well, he is my second cousin. And I didn't have to do a lot of research for that for the story. I just happened to know that his mother was my grandfather's sister, right? So that's easy. You live in a small community and yeah, you're related to somebody. Same thing here. So there's somebody that's closer. And so he says, look, here's the deal. I'm all in on this. However, someone else has a legal right that's ahead of me. So he says, verse 14, so she lay at his feet until morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. So at first, you're like, this whole story's kind of strange. She sneaks up, uncovers him, and now she sneaks away. And there wasn't any impropriety that happened here. And that's why he's like, hey, look, you need to get up and leave in the morning before anybody recognizes this, because he doesn't want it to look scandalous, right? Doesn't want to be on Jerry Springer. All right, same kind of deal. Oh no, I saw that Moabite gal, right? He wants to be above reproach. And so she leaves. And he said, bring out the garment that you are wearing and hold it out. So he held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. And she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? So she says to Boaz, hey, I'm leaving. I got to get back to town. And he says, don't leave until I give you something to take. And so she takes it. And then, the mother-in-law's kind of, and stop and think about this, right? So here's a mother-in-law who has her daughter-in-law, and she's trying to fix him up with a cousin, right? And so she's anxious. She's like, oh, how did it go? And it says, then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. So he gives her 6 measures of barley, which is quite a bit of barley. And many scholars point out that this 6 is pretty significant, right? Because in the next line in verse 18 it says, she replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest until he settles the matter today. And so what's the significance of 6? How is that a code? Well, when did God rest?
6 days.
Well, the 7th day, right? Right. So on 6 he didn't rest. So if he'd given 7, I guess if he'd given 7 measures of barley, he'd been, that guy's resting, ain't going to do anything. But the implication is that he's willing to work this out, and he's not going to rest until it happens, which is what happens. So, next day, chapter 4, says, now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So, gate of the city, back in that culture, right? There's another one where it would seem odd that, today somebody's sitting out at the intersection, like hanging out waiting for to transact some legal transaction. But back then, in that culture, the gate of the city was kind of like the town center, not the town center, but the town hall where legal transactions would occur. And apparently, well, we know that he's well off. We know that Boaz is well off. And it may be that he was kind of a political mover and shaker, because he shows up here and he's waiting for this transaction to go down. And he sees this closer redeemer come by. And it says, so Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. And it says, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. So he sees this closer relative, And he says, hey, come on over here. And then he finds 10 elders of the city, right? Well, what's the significance of 10? Well, they need to have a legal transaction. So they've got 10 that come by to witness this transaction as it goes down. And verse 2 it says, verse 3 says, then he said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So he lays out the deal. He says, hey, look, Naomi, she's suffering hard times. She's got some land, and it's up for sale. And so he says, verse 4 says, so I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. So there's this piece of land, and he says to this closer relative, hey, here's the deal. Naomi, hard times, need to redeem this property. And he says, if you want to buy it, you go for it. But if you don't, let me know, because I'd like to get a piece of that action. I'd like to get this property. And so, verse 5, it says, hold on. And he says, that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I will come after you. And he said, I will redeem it. So this closer relative, and we don't know, is Naomi and Ruth kind of in the back row, kind of watching, seeing what's going on, right? Because right now, in the story, the drama, all of a sudden, this guy who's not Boaz says, yeah, I'm all in. I'll take that property for sure, right? And you're like, oh no, right? This is a plot twist. And so what happens, here it comes. Then Boaz, and I really do think that Boaz is kind of setting this up a little bit, maybe being a little dramatic, but also making sure that this closer redeemer has the opportunity to think through the ramifications of what's about to happen. Because he says, so the guy's all in on the property. He'd like some more property. But then Boaz says, the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Right? So he's like, okay, yeah, you want the property, that's good. But know that also tied to this property is this widow. Right? And she doesn't have any kids. So the day that you get the field, you get the lady, right? And which is what Boaz is interested in. But let's see what our nearer kinsman says. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So what happens is this guy's like, yeah, expand my kingdom, get a little more property, some more fields. And then it's like, well, you got to marry this woman and raise offspring. And it could be that the guy was already married, right? Already had kids. And so then you've got it kind of messes up your inheritance of your kids, right? Because now you got other kids that are raised in the name of the other guy. And so he's like, and maybe he just like, and maybe he was married. He's like, nah, I don't want any of that. No, right? But today we'd say that's a hard pass. And so he does take a hard pass. And so, now check this out. Once again, this is going to be one of them things where it helps if we have a little bit of background. It says, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm the transaction, one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So we got this shoe thing, right? And so he, whips off his sandal, and this is how the transaction happens. It also happens that back in that Levirate marriage, if let's say you're the younger brother, okay, and your brother married this gal, and for whatever reason, your brother dies, and now you're being tapped as the one that gets to marry your sister-in-law and raise children. And you might be like, what if he doesn't want to? Guess what? There is an option, right? And you can say no. Okay, however, in that ceremony, what happens is she takes you before the elders, right? And basically, you have to take your sandal off, and then she spits in your face. Right? I mean, really, that's what it says. So anyway, here there's no spitting in the face, but there's also a transaction with the shoes and the sandals. And, think about in Bible times, right, the whole sandal thing, right? When Moses met God in the burning bush, what did God say? Remove your sandals, right? So, there's something about sandals. In the New Testament, when Jesus sent the disciples out and said, if they don't receive you, when you leave, shake the dust of the earth off your sandals, right? Because that's where you walked. And they don't want it, then you just shake it off, right? Remember at the Last Supper, Jesus washed the disciples' feet because they were dirty, because that's the interface with this world. And so back to our story, I think that this sandal thing in the exchange of the transaction is, I'm giving you my right for you to walk on that land, right? For you to own that land. And so that's what happens, is he took off his sandal and said, so when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders of the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belongs to Elimelech and all that belongs to Chilion and Mahlon. Also, Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are a witness this day. So, we had this kind of cliffhanger. This other Redeemer is going to redeem. But then it turns out, no, he's not. And so Boaz says, hey, I'm buying the land. I'm buying this because of this whole carrying on the name for Mahlon. And I'm gonna make this woman my wife, and I'm gonna carry on his family. In verse 11 it says, then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built the house of Israel. May you act worthy in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. So, he's got everything set up, right? And he did certainly put some thought into his plan, because he's got the nearer kinsman redeemer. He's got the 10 people, the 10 men, in order to make this an official transaction. He does the transaction, and they said, yep, you did it. It's illegal and binding. And then they said, you know what? We want to bless this woman, that she might be like Rachel and Leah. Rachel and Leah are the women that are the mothers of the nation of Israel, right? So they had a lot of kids, huge family, and it becomes a nation. And they're like, may this woman be like that. And it says, may you act worthy in Ephrathah, which is like, think of it like the county. It's that region, and be renowned in Bethlehem. And so Bethlehem, we've talked about this quite a bit, a lot happens in Bethlehem here, right now in our story, but also in the future, right? Because somebody's going to be born there. And so somebody's going to be born there, but we can trace it back to this story right here, right? Certainly it was prophesied, but if Ruth hadn't been who Ruth was, and if Boaz hadn't been who Boaz was, right, there's a lot to take and noodle through there. And it says, and may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. And we talked about Tamar in our introduction, and here we see that they are pointing out that Tamar, which seems, right, first glance, your first blush is like, why are they bringing up this story? Because the people that live here are descendants of Tamar. And so they're saying, you know, we want this gal to be as fruitful as Tamar was. And so, by golly, she was. So, verse 13 says, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. So, good news. They get married, and they have a baby, right? And it says it was from the Lord, which is fantastic. And it says, then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. So, here the baby, and so you got to be catching how this culture is so tight-knit, right? Because remember, this is Naomi, the daughter-in-law, a foreigner, who's converted to Judaism and is now married into this family, right? And Ruth has no genetic tie to any of these people. But what she has is something stronger, and it's this family tie. Because they say, blessed is the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. Talking about Naomi, right? That the Lord has blessed Naomi, but it's through Ruth. Okay? And it says that he shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. So, that 7 sons may ring a bell if you've studied through the Bible a little bit, right? Because Samuel was born to Hannah, and Hannah's, and so, sorry, I guess I need to give you a little context. So, about the same time, actually it's a few years after, but there's this woman who gives birth to Samuel. Her name's Hannah. And her husband's name was Elkanah. And what had happened was Hannah was barren, and she wanted a baby, right? And so she was at the temple, and she was praying, and she was praying so hard that she was crying. And the priest, he's like, hey lady, why are you drunk? You shouldn't be here drunk. And she's like, I'm not drunk. I'm crying because I'm brokenhearted because I don't have a child. Right? And so Eli, the priest, is like, oh, oops. And so anyway, he says, he prays for her, and she does end up having a baby. But her husband, Elkanah, would try to comfort her because she didn't have any children. Right? And so what happens, he says, am I not better than 7 sons? Right? And just, that sounds like something I'd say to my wife, right? Which is like, I've said a lot of dumb things. Oh, look, and she's not here, so she can either confirm or deny. The point is that was a dumb thing to say, right? Am I not better than 7 sons? And, you know, even I can see through that one, right? That's not a good one. But here, the point is that here we have a daughter-in-law who's converted to Judaism, that the people in the community are like, she's better than 7 sons. And here you even got another son. And so I love this part of the story. It says, then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. Okay, and this is a cultural thing, right? Because when we think of baby and nurse, right? Yeah, this ain't that. Okay, she's not a wet nurse. And it's funny because I had a friend, and she was from Australia, and she was talking about nursing a baby, and I'm like, what? But nursing means like, you know, giving care to, right? So Naomi gave care to the baby. And it says, the women of the neighborhood gave him a name. This is great. The community's so involved in this child, right? It's so miraculous that the neighbors come by and like, all right, we're going to name the baby. So it says, and the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And you're going to say, oh, another name. There must be a meaning. Yes, Obed means servant of God. So here we have this young baby boy who is born to this woman who's converted to Judaism. And we know that Boaz, he was a great follower of God, right? Remember, he greeted his workers with salutations to the Lord. And so he does go on to be quite an important character in history. And we're just about done. So it says, in 18, it says, now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. And so here is the kind of shortened community genealogy. And so what happens is this sets the stage, obviously, for King David, but also for Jesus. And like I said, next week we're gonna go through and we're gonna kind of do an overall picture, kind of a higher elevation view of this book and what it all means. So with that, I think the guys are going to get ready to start passing out communion. But it's an amazing book. It's a book